Transform all your company's milestones, big or small, into impact with Impact Hero. Whether it's a sale, a new hire, a demo booked, or anything else, with Impact Hero, you automatically generate a gift that matters, like a tree planted, a kilo of plastic recovered, or a piece of coral reef restored. Join the hundreds of companies that are already boosting sales and retention while making an impact. Go to impacthero.com/podcast now to get 10% off. Again, that's impacthero.com/podcast to get 10% off.
Welcome to another Climate Tech podcast, interviews with the people trying to save us from ourselves. Joel Tasche is co-founder of CleanHub, which matches brands that produce plastic waste with the places in the global south that collect this waste. Through collection, verification, measurement, and a system of credits, they're working to help rebalance the system and get plastic out of the ocean. I reached Joel in Berlin. I'm Ryan Grant Little. Thanks for being here. Joel, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot for having me, Ryan. Good to be here.
You describe yourself as a lover of the ocean, and no surprise, you said how much you hate seeing plastic waste in the ocean. So what's your connection? Are you a surfer? Where does this come from?
Yeah, I'm a passionate but very untalented surfer. And I personally grew up at Lake Constance, which is in southern Germany, and we call it the Swabian Sea. We call it that because when it gets foggy, which it gets a lot, you can't see the other side of the lake, so it does look like the ocean. But I grew up sailing, swimming, and spent a lot of time outdoors. We had the Swiss and the Austrian Alps around the corner, right? So lots of outdoors activities. And then at some point, sailing wasn't cool enough anymore, and I started surfing and fell in love with it and dedicated basically my early 20s to it and kind of designed my life around it. So I chose the universities where I knew that when I go for a semester abroad, I can go to some of the best surf spots and, always work during the semester to have the semester break off and go surfing. And that led me a lot to Southeast Asia, also specifically Indonesia. And no matter where you went, it can be the shoreline, it can be a volcano, you'd see plastic pollution everywhere. And that's not something that I was used to because southern Germany is also economically, I would say, a more strong area of Germany where things are in order, right? It's like almost stereotypically trimmed gardens and all that. And also if you go to Switzerland or to the Alps in general, people take care of the environment a lot. And then when you see such beautiful nature so polluted with plastic pollution, that is to some degree frustrating. And, I then participated in beach cleanups and did all that. And the next day you come back and things look exactly the same. And you wonder, what's behind that? And yeah, at some point I pushed that thought to the back of my mind and started my career in B2B software and kept surfing. And I kept having that nagging thought in the back of my mind that there needs to be a somewhat scalable solution for that problem. And when I finally quit my job after 3 years, I said I want to start my own company. I knew that I wanted it to be dedicated to the problem of plastic pollution. I didn't know what the solution would look like, but that's where it all started.
My own surfing career lasted about 15 minutes in Morocco after the board got kind of like behind me and then the tip of it right into my ribs and I could barely breathe for about 5 days. So that was not my sport, I guess, but it's pretty cool to watch. And I wish I could do it, but I'll stick to skiing and running and stuff.
Yeah, like every sport, it looks so easy from the outside, but once you're in the water, right, and the wave comes crashing down, you're like, oh my God, what's going on?
I mean, and I also really don't like being underwater. So I've got like a real phobia of that. And so like a wave sweeping your way and not knowing which way is up. And so I think, just sitting with like a John le Carré book on the beach is a better fit for me. But so was this deep-seated connection and the frustration or despair or whatever noun you want to use, seeing all this plastic wash up over and over, no matter how many times you do a cleanup, that led you and your co-founder, Florentinga, to start CleanHub. That's 5 years ago, so 2019. Different worlds, basically, in a lot of ways, from pre-pandemic to interest rates and all of that kind of thing. Take us back 5 years and talk a little bit about the formation of the company there in Berlin and maybe kind of bring us up, to present day.
Yeah. The company officially started in January 2020, but I quit my job in December 2018. So there was an entire year between that. And a lot of that year was dedicated to research. So I spent time in India. I spent time in the Philippines. I spent time in Sri Lanka. Quite frankly, always connected a bit with surfing as well. And because I wanted to understand where the problem comes from, right? And then I came back to Germany at some point and said, okay, maybe I need to do something in the German waste management ecosystem and understand that first. So I studied that. I unpaid internships basically with waste management companies. I attended conferences from like the cradle who don't believe in the concept of waste all the way on the other spectrum, which was the waste to energy lobby meeting in Brussels. And yeah, so I've seen a broad spectrum, and we tried different ideas in the waste management space. And at some point we said, okay, if we do something here in Germany, how is that really going to have an impact on what's going on in the areas where pollution is really stark? And at that point, a friend from India actually messaged me and said, hey, the government is dumping all the trash on my land, and you're the only person that I know that cares about waste. Can you help me? And I was intrigued. We had a phone call, and after the call, I actually booked a ticket to India and visited him for roughly 2 weeks. And he took me around and showed me like what's going on. And we sat at the dinner table, and I was asking him, hey, do you know what happens to your trash after you dump it? And he said, I have no idea. So we started to follow that trash bag basically, and stumbled across all these different things like the informal sector, the informal recycling industry. I learned that the circular economy, meaning that you reuse things a lot, that you recycle things, that you don't throw anything of value and extend the life cycle of it, is much, much stronger in India than it is in Germany. And that goes for a big amount of the more emerging countries. So yeah, it was a lot of learning, a lot of listening, a lot of observing and trying to understand where's the root cause of the problem. And what a surprise it is in the economics. And yeah, with that insights, we came back to Germany and we said we have a rough understanding of what we need to do. And what we need to do is to increase collection and sorting capacity for waste. The early idea was, and we almost had a deal with a mayor in Sri Lanka of a small village, to build our own material recovery facility, like a physical place to sort waste. But we quickly learned that no investor in the world wants to fund a waste management company in Sri Lanka. And so we had to change approach again. And then we found the model, which is now CleanHub, which is more asset light, right? But we can go into that in a bit. And that's when we had the idea. That's when we went out to fundraise. And that was then late 2019, and a company formed in Jan 2020. And we closed the fundraise in March 2020, and then the pandemic.
Yep. Devastating. The pandemic was devastating for the waste sector and for waste pickers in particular, who have, of course, no social safety net whatsoever. How did the pandemic change the nature of the business?
To some degree, we didn't have a business at that point. We had a business on paper,
or of the industry, maybe more broadly.
I think to understand how things changed, one needs to understand how it works in these countries. And what I mentioned was that you have a strong informal sector, and this informal sector, they collect commodity. They collect whatever can still be recycled. That is PET water bottles, that is HDPE shampoo bottles, or any hard plastic, because they're paid by the kilogram at the end of the day, right? And if you pick up a foil or a chips bag, you have to pick up quite a lot to get to something that somebody pays you for. They pick up glass, they pick up paper, cardboard, whatever you can sell as a recycled material. What they leave behind is all the non-recyclable stuff, all the multi-layer packaging where you have aluminum, plastic compounds, all the thin foils like LDPE, PP foils. And if you look at the pandemic, what happened is people retreated back home, right? No matter where you were in the world. There was an increased need for hygiene, and plastic as a packaging material is doing a fantastic job at providing a hygienic product, a sterile product all the way around the world. So, I mean, if you remember back to the mask, right? Every single one was individually wrapped. Every single COVID test was individually wrapped. That increased waste a lot, and specifically of the non-recyclable sort. Then at the same time, you had contaminated waste going out, right? All the COVID tests, nobody knew at that point how contagious is all that. the used masks, all that stuff was thrown away. And at the same time, people started ordering stuff home. And also in India, right? No matter where you are. So waste volumes increased drastically. So waste got less valuable. And on top of that, the working conditions got more dangerous for the waste pickers because they don't have social security, right? They don't have the luxury to sit at home and wait until it's over. And they live day to day. Also cash flow wise, right? The informal waste collectors are usually the lowest income people, the most marginalized communities. And they couldn't stop working. So they still went out to pick waste, but in horrendous conditions. And yeah, that changed a lot.
I work with a lot of companies who plan to open up shop in or expand across Europe. My one big piece of advice, don't fall into the trap of setting up a new entity right away. Instead, talk to my friends at Paracar, who can help you get up and running without all the costs, not to mention the legal and HR hassle. When I was hiring in different EU countries, I wanted my team to focus on their work, not on the country's bureaucracy. After interviewing a half dozen international expansion firms, I chose Paracar because they were by far the most knowledgeable and they're great people. Whether you're a large multinational looking to expand abroad, a small business looking for the right talent, or a contractor, they'll sort it out. Book a free, no-obligation consultation right now at paracar.eu/climate. That's PARAKAR.eu/climate. I mean, it's not just the terrible conditions and having to be out there and being at risk, but there's also having to violate stay-at-home orders and these kinds of things. And so I know a lot of waste pickers found themselves basically choosing between whether they want to get in trouble for being out, in violation of that, or if they're going to eat that day. And this seemed to be a kind of a cascading effect across the industry as well.
Yeah, it was also, for me, a very interesting cultural learning because I was sitting in my apartment back in Berlin and I was mostly safe. And then you speak to people, I don't know, from Ghana and from around the world. And you talk with them about COVID and it's like, COVID, we have way bigger problems here. It's a completely different perspective on it. And
like, why does it take 15 minutes for my groceries to get here with gorillas?
Yeah, exactly. And then there's like, yeah, COVID is a thing, but we have other issues. And, it was also interesting. But for us as CleanHub, what we did in the end, the first 2-3 months, nothing happened, right? The entire markets were down. Nobody was doing anything. And we were sitting, waiting, wishing for better times and keeping the money together. But we invested in building relationships. We invested in building the technology at that point. And out of these relationships, COVID took a long time, right? We started to help also the businesses that we work with establish more safe work environments and making sure that there's emergency funds so that people were continually paid, even if there were downtimes in the business. So these things happened on a scale that we were able to afford, right? I don't want to sit here and say like we saved the entire world. That affected maybe 30, 40 employees in the projects itself. But in the way that was possible for us, we tried to support.
I want to come back to some of this as well in a minute, but let's shift focus and talk a little bit about CleanHub as a product. So you're a SaaS company. You work, what kind of customers do you work with? What problem do you solve for them?
Yeah, I would say the easiest way to describe CleanHub is we're a two-sided marketplace, right? If you talk in business terms. And on the one side of the marketplace, we have consumer good brands that have an issue with plastic, that need to use plastic to some degree. Others already managed to completely phase away from it, but that's a completely different discussion whether or not plastic has a right in the economy. And on the other side of the marketplace, we have the waste management companies, mostly in the global south, exclusively in the global south, exclusively in pollution hotspots, where there's usually no waste management, because our goal is to solve one problem, and that is 2 billion people in the world do not have access to waste management services. And as I teased earlier, that is for economic reasons, because if you collect trash, the majority of that will not be fit for recycling. So you can't turn it into a product and sell it, but you actually have to dispose of it. And disposal, especially if you want to do it in the most safe way possible, which in this case is co-processing, which means you turn it into fuel in the cement industry, you have to pay a tipping fee. You have to pay the cement plant to accept the waste. So where's the money in the market? Waste management only costs money. It's a service. It's not a manufacturing process where you have an end product. And if nobody pays for the service is not being performed. And this is how we get to pollution. Because if nobody comes to pick up your trash, what are you going to do? You're either going to burn it under the open sky, which is common practice around the world. And that practice is responsible for anywhere between 2 to 10% of greenhouse gas equivalent emissions, which is insane. And nobody talks about it really. Yeah. Or you throw it in the next river, you throw it in the ocean, you bury it, you just want to get rid of it, right? And we connect those that produce the plastic and talk with them and say, it's like, hey, maybe you can't get rid of it, but at least you can take responsibility for it. And on the other side of the world, we then have the companies that receive the money to actually run the waste management services. What we do in the middle is, because you need to establish trust in such a system, right? It's like people don't necessarily want to transfer money from the US or Germany or wherever they are into India for waste management. And that is a general issue in my eyes in the waste management world. And we're getting very geeky and detail oriented here. But the problem with waste management as a service is it's one of the few services where you don't have evidence of work. If I go to the hairdresser, I can look into the mirror at the end of it and say, it's like, oh my God, what did you do? Hey, you did a great job. If I go to a massage, I know I liked it, whatever, right? It's like if somebody cleans my apartment, I can see whether it's clean or not. In waste management, I can say, yeah, somebody picked up my trash, but that's it. I don't know what happens to it afterwards. I don't know if they send it to Asia. I don't know if they dump it in the ocean. I don't know if they burn it because they want to save cost. And what needs to happen is that consumers and the entire market gets the transparency that the waste management process is finished accordingly. And this is where we build software. This is where we build track and trace to really collect the evidence that waste is being collected from the household, is going into sorting. Whatever can be recycled is taken out, and whatever cannot be recycled is being responsibly disposed of. And this is what our tech does, that we track all that we collect all the evidence from that and store it in one central place so we can verify whatever claims are being made, and then we can establish trust in the market. And through trust comes more investment, right?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, that's a topic I wanted to ask you about. Both I've, as key words here, trust and verification, and just wondering how you verify that everything ends up where it's supposed to. I mean, these kinds of supply chains, all kinds of global supply chains are very complicated. Yeah. And, knowing how bananas were picked or anything like that is very challenging. With waste, which is, less of a commodity, as you've just described, it's probably very difficult. And I wonder kind of what does the interplay of technology and trust look like for a topic like verification? What kind of conversations are you having both with your customers and with the projects themselves about this topic? How is it evolving?
The conversations that we have, especially smaller brands, they look at it and for them it's an important factor, but you can establish trust in different ways, right? So it can be through personal connection, but I don't think that personal connection scales. And especially if you start talking to the larger brands, this is when certifications, data, all of that becomes really interesting, especially if you look at the shifts in also the regulatory frameworks. We have the Green Claims Initiative coming up in Europe that says every green claim has to be substantiated. How do you substantiate? Only through evidence, right? So the evidence needs to be collected. There are clean traceability standards for recycling where you need to collect data to actually back them up. And these are conversations that are accelerating a lot. Like if you talk to a big brand owner, one of the number one things that they care about when it comes to recycling is traceability. When it comes to any kind of environmental claim is evidence. And I think there's two ways to that, right? So we can do it the old school way and hire very expensive consultant or auditing companies or whatever, and have these rubber mark quality checks where they look at it once a year and they say, yeah, looks good, and charge a crazy amount of money for that. Yeah. Or we can do it in a more technology driven way. And I think, especially if there's a danger to sound buzzwordy, but if you look at the developments in artificial intelligence and image recognition software and all these different topics, there's huge opportunity to make all of that cheaper, because the number one thing when it comes to waste is things need to be efficient. You can't add a ton of cost. And what we do is we established our own tracking system. It starts at the household level in most cases, where people have a QR code on the door. And when the waste collectors come, they scan the QR code. In that moment, we know that they checked in. They receive the bag. They take an image of the bag as evidence that this bag was collected. We pull the geolocation and we know that this bag was collected at the location where it was supposed to be collected. We receive the weight from that, and the image model is actually making an approximation of what it thinks that bag weighs. And a lot of factors play in there. It's the size of the bag. It's the form of the bag. Like, is it very saggy? Is it very fluffy and voluminous? And also, what's the history of that household? It's like, have they always producing that amount of waste roughly? Or are there crazy jumps in there? And that's all playing together. And that's then the first level. And that bag then goes onto a truck. And on that truck, we accumulate the different bags, right? And at some point, the truck is full and it goes into the so-called material recovery facility where the trash is being sorted. And that truck going there is being weighed at the entrance. And then we cross-compare, do the volumes of the bags that we registered add up to what the truck weighs? And that way we know, okay, step one, all clear. No waste that we don't want on there has been added, or we also didn't underreport, even though at this stage it wouldn't really matter. Then the waste goes into the facility. We know how much volume is being booked into that facility. So we're keeping book basically of what's going in and what's going out. And then the sorting process starts. So we always know, okay, how much non-recyclables are being sorted out. And then at the same time, that tells us how much recyclables there are. And in some cases, we know it in more detail. Then we know, okay, this is blue PET, this is white PET, this is green PET. It depends on how precisely things are tracked. But we always know how much of that chunk was non-recyclable plastic. And then we know how much non-recyclable stuff is sitting in stock. And at some point when the stock gets full, let's say we're at 12 tons, they send a truck. That truck is being registered and they book out all the volumes onto that truck or partial volumes. And the truck is being weighed again. And then we have the new book value of how much waste was there. Then the truck goes into disposal where it's being weighed again. And then we know, okay, did the same volume that was sent out also arrived in disposal? And then at the disposal location, we also get a lab test where we test for moisture in the waste. Because if you are in monsoon heavy areas, right, there will be 10, 20, sometimes even 30% water in the waste. And we deduct that from the gross weight. And that way we get to the net weight of plastic that was actually certified and recovered. And this is what is plastic credit for us. This is what's then the tradable unit. So we assign a value to the non-valuable, basically.
I feel like in addition to CleanHub, you could white label this technology for other purposes. I'm thinking of DHL, which has lost my last 2 packages. but there must be interest in, I mean, what you've built scales to other industries, or, you know, have you considered that as a model as well to white label?
White labeling, not so much yet. What we're currently very actively looking at is applying that into the world of recycling, because it comes natural to us, right? We already know all the partners. So we are working on 2 pilots to actually track bottles into a final new product again for supply chains that already work. And we just recently signed a contract with one of our partners where we built our first co-owned waste management center, because so far we always had, like, we sit on and expand existing operations. And this time we also participated in CAPEX, where we then have a full center that's going to manage roughly 6,000 tons a year. And there we then also have more control in what the exact software setup is. So we want to digitize actually the entire waste management chain, because we need to bring in more efficiencies, right? If you want to make waste management profitable, you have 2 levers that you can pull. You can either increase the value of the final output product, or you decrease the cost that it takes to manage it. And you need to pull on both. And software is a great way to also be more efficient, be more data driven, make smarter choices. So we are planning to actually develop this more into a full stack waste management platform, then expanding the track and trace element into different industries.
We talked a minute ago about verification. The first cousin of verification is measurement, and that's also a central theme of your platform. And I wonder what kind of your KPIs, so to speak, are for impact metrics, and what do the numbers maybe look like, you know, now in aggregate across all of your customers?
Yeah. So we track two numbers very meticulously, and I'm just waiting for the final Q1 numbers to come in. So the first one is total waste collected, which means across all projects that we have, across all waste management companies that we work with, how much volume is being booked into their material recovery facility. And there we are at close to 9 million kilogram, so 9,000 tons, which is in the world of waste management, a tiny little drop in the ocean still, right? To also be very realistic here, but the growth curve behind it is the more interesting part. And the second metric that we track is how much of that was then certified disposed of. This means how many plastic credits did we issue. And there I would need to report back to you how much that is today, because I don't want to give any wrong numbers. I'm coming out of a paternity leave actually currently.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks also my small eyes, but
don't worry, I'm not auditing you on this.
But other people do. So
yeah, true. Fair.
I think this is the interesting part. We are working together with TÜV Süd, which is a German auditing company that the Germans will all know, but they actually have presence in more than 180 countries. And they are basically coming in almost like bookkeepers and look at the numbers and say, like, does what CleanHub say make sense? Were the volumes as CleanHub communicate them also registered on the platform? And are they allocated towards the customers as CleanHub says to the outside world? Yeah,
that's a big one too, right? I mean, in this industry, to ensure that there's no double counting and
exactly.
Parse that out.
That's what TÜV does. That's the one element of the business, right? But what we touched on early in the conversation is the social element of the business, because you are working with a very marginalized community of people, and social standards are quite behind in the world of waste management. And one of our principles at CleanHub is that we try to bring people from the more informal work sector into a formal employment. And that works pretty well in most projects. In some others, there's still work to be done, because it's also a certain barrier that you need to overcome, right? Some people actually want to stay in informal work environments for different reasons. But for us, we need formal work environments that we can actually run auditing. And we have 3 people on the ground in India and Indonesia that are working together with the partners to level up the social compliance. So we do our own social audits. And on top of that, we work with a third-party company called Supply Exchange under the management of Kate Larson, who has like 25 years experience in social auditing. She managed supply chains for Burberry. She managed supply chains for the Children's Place, mostly in the fashion industry, but they came from a similar background there where very few rules were implemented. And she also wrote our code of conduct, which is based on 3 major labor standards, which is the SA 8000, FLA, and ETI. And we basically currently audit against our own code of conduct and have that built into the platform as well. So whenever we have non-compliances, this is flagged in the platform, and then people can upload the evidence that they remediated things. And this can be things like firefighting systems. There can be things like a maternity policy for the female workers. There can be policies around bathrooms, restrooms, things that need to be in the facility, ventilation in the facility, all these things. And this is then more an internal metric, right? It's like how many non-compliances did we remediate? Because our approach is one of continuous work and not of exclusion. So if you walk into a facility, there will always be something that you can find, right? It's like maybe there's no time tracking device or something like that. But we, in the audits, find all that and then work together with the partners to level them up.
I've worked a lot in this space as well and helped to fund 8 projects in the global south, from the Philippines through to Peru, and to expand kind of existing facilities. As you mentioned, it's very hard to get access to financing in a lot of these countries. And one of the things I see that you track a number of jobs made safer, which I love. And one of the numbers we tracked for this program was new jobs for women or women empowerment. And we did similar things. I mean, a lot of it is some of the basic plumbing, like getting bathrooms there.
Yeah, it's insane. It's like,
and then up to health insurance and kindergartens and education and stuff like that, and trying to make some courses so that a lot of the women waste pickers can kind of level up to the aggregator level and that type of thing. And I wonder if
my favorite part is we're currently looking at an upskilling program to make people from waste sorters into forklift drivers, which is a crazy jump. And it's also these things that sometimes are very hard to measure, that are more qualitative. But we have a wonderful person on the ground named Lakshmi. She's from India. She knows the waste management space inside out, and she organized workshops on sustainable menstruation products with the female workforce. Like, she's also touching a lot of the more taboo topics. She organizes workshops with the children of the village to do theater workshops to educate on plastic pollution and all that. It's really the people there. And I think that's one of my biggest learnings, and something that I fortunately did right from the get-go is like, don't assume that you can know everything if you go to a different country, right? And that's also not the job there. But hire people with a local context, with a local cultural context, that know how to have these conversations. That it's impossible if you didn't grow up there to think that you can
intervene in a meaningful way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's
also in a respectful ways.
Yeah. I mean, country by country also. I mean, like, as you've probably seen in the Philippines, there are some interesting taboos around women lifting heavy items and that type of thing. So you really have to understand the country by country cultural context.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was a forklift driver for a summer as a young teenager at a warehouse, very illegally, doing 24-hour shifts sometimes also. And I think looking back, it's one of my favorite jobs ever. It's like playing 3D Tetris and getting paid for it.
It's so cool. I only got to drive these little ones on the floor where you still had to pump manually and all that. But,
oh no, you got it. I mean, it's so much fun. So your plastics recovery operations are in India, Indonesia, Tanzania, and Cambodia. I wanted to ask you how you decide to locate them. I think I have one of the criteria, and that's good surfing. But what's some of the other criteria, and what else do you have on the radar looking ahead?
Yeah, for us, it's the most important thing is always the relation to the local entity that we work with. And the projects that fall under our plastic credits all have to be coastal communities or within 50 kilometers of the coast. And that's the second point. And we need to make sure that there is additionality. And what that means for us is that we expand collection, that we reach more households, that we implement new things that weren't there before. And the other way how we ensure additionality is that our plastic credit is only assigned to the non-recyclable plastics. Because what other people do in the market is they collect what is already being collected, namely PET bottles, HDPE bottles, and a bale of HDPE or a ton of PET trades for roughly $1,000 US. It is a commodity. It is widely collected. There are maybe a few remote islands where it's not, because the cost of transportation eats up the entire margin. So there is a chance to have additionality with PET as well. The more remote you go, the less collection. But generally, I think you have a very hard time to prove the additionality of a plastic credit on something that is recyclable already, which is why we don't do it. And then for us, the core areas are India and Indonesia. Indonesia, for the fact that it's such a massive country with so many islands. And I think you could just do a company there and focus on that, and you wouldn't finish in a lifetime. The other thing is India, because it's such a strongly growing economy with a long coastline. And at the same time, you have political programs there in place, Swachh Bharat, Clean India. So the country itself as an economy is thinking in the right direction. And these are were the core drivers for us to go there. And also the fact that in the beginning, we only knew English, right? And where we had to also see whether people speak good English.
Yeah, communication is super important with these projects as well, as I've learned. We spoke 3 years ago over Zoom during the kind of thick of the pandemic. And since then, I've followed you on LinkedIn and other places, and the company's grown substantially. I think you mentioned you have about 35 people, depending on how you count, working for the company now. So congratulations, things are going well. This is obviously a topic that's getting more and more attention, and rightfully so. And I wonder, just for the company itself, kind of what does the next year or two ahead look like?
Yeah, I think in regards of growth, we are venture backed, right? So you have to grow quite dramatically. At the same time, any kind of forecast is difficult, but we try to triple every year, especially in regards to volume. And the way how to get there is what I mentioned earlier. We're slightly changing the way how we work together with our partners and invest more into our own projects moving forward, meaning that we more or less co-own the operations. And that's very important for us because I believe the answer to plastic pollution still needs to be scalable. And I think this will turn more into almost like a franchising system where we have to open new hubs along the coastlines. My vision is ideally a cleanup in every coastal community. That's a long, long way to go, but that's what's required because we have to be realistic. People will continue to produce waste. Since the dawn of time, humanity created waste. There is no process without it. And the nature of waste changes, but the fact remains that it has to be collected. Even if we will switch to biodegradable plastics, that's still not an excuse to just dump it into the environment and have nature take care of it. If you would throw your banana peels out of the window on the streets of Berlin, you would still get in trouble, even though it's biodegradable. You need waste collection, no matter what happens. And you need to make sure that this material is being looped back into the economy, right? So we will continue to invest in expanding waste collection and sorting capacities. That will never change. And we will continue to invest into technology to make things more and more transparent, more and more efficient, because especially if you grow that network, right, you don't want to increase costs with every center that you build, but a bit like the Amazon approach, and we can think about them what we want. But in regards of efficiency, they did a fantastic job by continuously investing into their own platform and in making things more efficient and into making processes more and more data-driven, software-driven. And I think that's what the world of waste management also needs: standardization, scalability, and repeatability.
So you can borrow from Amazon's example to solve the problem that is largely being created by Amazon as well.
To some degree, yes.
Yeah, sure. And it makes sense.
I can only encourage every entrepreneur to read the shareholder letters by Bezos. And again, no matter what you think of him, there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, for sure. That's right. Yeah. And so for people who want to get involved with the mission or learn more about it, where's the best place to find you and CleanHub?
I think mostly on Instagram. This is where we post most about our progress as a company. That's at cleanhub.io, which is still our old domain. If anybody knows the owner of CleanHub on Instagram, it has 2 followers. It's impossible to get that account. Completely inactive account. We love to get that. Anyway, so this is the number 1 place. And on LinkedIn, we are also quite active. I'm also active on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect there. One note on LinkedIn, I'm currently on a bit of a LinkedIn detox, so I might not respond to messages.
I'm jealous.
But feel free to reach out via email. And
great. I'll put all of that, as always, in the show notes. Yeah. Joel, what a pleasure talking to you. Great to see you again after 3 years.
Likewise, Ryan. And let's hope there's not going to be 3 years until the next time.
I doubt it. Yeah. Take care.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to another Climate Tech podcast. It would mean a lot if you would subscribe, rate, and share this podcast. Get in touch anytime with tips and guest recommendations at hello@climatetechpod.com. Find me, Ryan Grant Little, on LinkedIn. I'll be back with another episode next week. Bye for now. This episode is supported by Grizzle, B2B content to create and capture demand. I first met Grizzle's founder, Tom Watley, 5 years ago at a conference in Dublin. I was so impressed that I signed a deal with him to do all my software company's content that same evening at the pub. Remember that, Tom?
Kinda.
And they're still doing it 2 years after we sold the company because the new owners love Grizzle as much as I do. If you sell B2B, book 30 minutes in Tom's calendar at grizzle.io/climate. That's GRIZZLE.io/climate.